Hi, I'm Ed Steinfeld. I'm the director of the Watson Institute for International and Public Affairs. It's my pleasure today to welcome you all to our session on preserving the Obama legacy, reflections from former cabinet members, and it's truly my pleasure to welcome two former cabinet members of the Obama administration. I'll do some brief introductions, and then the three of us will have a brief discussion, and then we're going to open it up to questions and spend the bulk of our time discussing these issues with you all, so keep questions in mind. Sitting to my right, to your left, is Gina McCarthy. Gina served as the 13th administrator of the Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA, from 2013 to 2017 during the second term of the Obama administration. Among her achievements in that position was the design and finalization of the Clean Power Plan, an extension of the Clean Air Act. The Clean Power Plan was a policy effort to reduce CO2 emissions from power plants, electric power generation, by 32% relative to 2005 levels by 2030. This was the first ever, to the best of my knowledge, U.S. policy across all states, the individual states, to meet power plant emissions reductions, either by improving efficiency in plants or switching to cleaner fuels, cleaner fossil fuels like natural gas, or substituting in carbon-free fuels or renewable power. The policy paved the way for another important policy achievement, the 2016 Paris Agreement, in which signatories agreed to pursue similar national targets for carbon emissions reductions globally. Prior to serving in the EPA, Gina McCarthy had served as environmental advisor to 5 Massachusetts governors, including Mitt Romney. And from 2004 to 2009, she served as commissioner of the Connecticut Department of Environmental Protection under Republican Governor Jody Rell. Tom Perez served as the 26th United States Secretary of Labor, also from 2013 to 2017, the second term of the Obama administration. Among Tom's achievements included the implementation of the fiduciary rule, elevating professionals who work with retirement plans, 401ks, or provide retirement advice, elevating them to the legal status of fiduciaries, and thus forbidding them from receiving commissions that create a conflict of interest or a potential conflict of interest. Tom also issued the home care rule, requiring that home health care providers receive minimum wage and overtime compensation, as well as the persuader rule that required law firms of employers to publicly disclose the work that employers do surrounding unionization efforts, or especially the inhibition of unionization efforts. Prior to serving as Secretary of Labor, Tom served as head of the Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division. Prior to that, he had been Maryland's Secretary of Labor, and prior to that, he was a member, the first Latino member, of the County Council of Montgomery County, Maryland. Tom today is the chairman of the Democratic National Committee, and he's a proud 1983, or we're proud of Tom. He's a 1983 graduate of Brown, and I should mention, Gina, you were, I'm sure proud, but UMass Boston is, I'm sure, very proud of you, a proud alumna of UMass Boston. Yay. What I'd like to do is just begin the conversation with some quick questions, and then we'll open it up. So first, I'll ask you both, maybe Gina, we'll start with you. You both developed new and dramatically new policy initiatives in the face of substantial opposition, congressional opposition, some legal opposition, some opposition at the state level. So can you walk us through how you were able to get things done? How was policy designed? What was the architecture of policy in order to navigate the kind of opposition that you faced?
Well, Ed, first of all, thank you for inviting me, and it's great to be here with Tom. We haven't seen each other for a while, and we were both confirmed on the same day, so we both have one another's pictures on our walls. So it is, you know, it was really fun. We just came from a leadership course, and I think one of the things that you try to teach young people is that there's lots of different styles of leadership. But for me, you know, I got work done because I picked a team that was smarter and different than me. I surrounded myself with the most wonderful people, 2 of which are sitting in the audience. I would start with Cynthia Giles, who is the assistant administrator at our Office of Environment and Compliance Assistance. Cynthia, will you please stand up? She did remarkable work and continues to do remarkable work, I think, out of Chicago now, right? And I have Kurt Spalding there, who was, if you remember him from here, from Save the Bay, but he was also our regional administrator in Region 1. So, what we were doing was making good on basically a promise that the president was very clear about, even before I took office, was that we tried to use Congress and do a law that addressed climate change, and it did not succeed. So we were going to do what we had to do under the law anyways, which is to regulate carbon pollution. And so what we did to get it done is we followed the law, which may seem unusual these days. We actually embraced the science, which is clearly unusual these days. And we did huge amounts of public process. Tom and I are both public servants. That's what we do. We care to find out and to learn from the public about what they think, its impact on utilities, what it would do for consumer cost, what kind of opportunities we had to advance environmental justice and equity issues as we were designing it. So it took, it takes hard work to do this, and we are talking about work that took years.
And could you say just a bit more about the public process, the public part of it?
Yeah, I could. We had literally hundreds of meetings across the United States. We generated over 8 million comments on the proposal and the final rule. The final rule was 4.3 million comments. And to those of you that think it was because it was controversial, you're incorrect. It was because the overwhelming number of people were just individuals expressing their need, the need to take action on climate. And one of the things I did, Ed, that I think sort of ensured that it was done well was that we became best friends with the energy world. We knew it. We lived it. We stayed with them. And what you see in this administration is their announcement to think about rolling back the Clean Power Plan did not have a lineup of utilities going, attaboy. It actually was AEP and Southern were the first two out of the gate, and both of them said this will make absolutely no difference in the way we are investing. Because clean energy's happened, that's how we're investing, and that's it. So it aggravates me that they're relitigating these things, if you will. I think it's a waste of time. It also sends a terrible international signal. But you got to look at what the real world looks like and what's happening. The real world is not what you hear out of Washington, D.C. The real world is what real people need and want and how they're spending their money. And clean energy is it.
We'll circle back to some of the politics and the business in business-government relations in just a moment. But Tom, do you want to walk us through also an example of building policy in the face of opposition?
Absolutely, and it's great to be back here. I was telling Ed, I got here in 1979, and my first class I ever had at Brown University was in this room. So I'm having a massive flashback right now. So if I look a little...
Thanks for giving back.
Yes, and it was with a guy named Ed Beiser. If some of you are a little been here longer, one of the most remarkable professors ever at Brown University.
What was the class?
It was called Politics of the Legal System. And,
that was convenient.
Yeah, and yes, and it was a wonderful course. And so I apologize for having that flashback for a moment. I couldn't agree more with what Gina said. The key to success in putting the priorities in place is you've got to be a good listener. You've got to build a big table. You've got to marshal the evidence. You've got to have an open mind, understanding. You might have a hypothesis and someone comes in and tells you that's wrong or that's partially right. And here's what you have to do. And then you've got to get real people involved because, frankly, in Washington, there's a whole class of lobbyists who benefit from the status quo. And let me give you a very concrete example because that was kind of a 30,000-foot example. In the world of Ozzie and Harriet, Leave It a Beaver, Ward Cleaver, went to the office for 30 years and at the end of that 30-year period, he came home, he retired, he got a pen, a party, and a pension, and that pension was what we called a defined benefit plan, a pension. So he didn't have to worry about it. Someone else worried about it, and he had that pension for life. And if he was smart and he had a survivor, then if he predeceased June, then, you know, she would get that pension after he died. And that was the world when the laws of the 1970s were passed on pension protections. Fast forward to the modern family universe, where we now have an $11 trillion 401k IRA market. Now today, when you go in most places, you have a 401k plan in which you are the master of your retirement destiny. And you have to make choices about how to invest, what plan to invest in. And, you know, if you go to your lawyer and your doctor, they have a legal and ethical obligation to look out for your best interests. But if you go to your financial advisor, they have an obligation, or had an obligation, to give you information that was suitable to your interests, which meant that they could take into account their own compensation scheme. You could have 5 plans that are suitable, and plans 3 through 5 give them a bigger commission at your expense. And what do you think they will do? You know, if you were diagnosed with cancer and your doctor told you this treatment was suitable, you would tell her, what the heck is suitable? What's going to save my life? That's what you would do. And so we were trying to modernize the world of retirement savings. And to give you a sense of scale and scope, the $11 trillion industry of what are called defined contribution plans, that's real money. And when you have somebody who can take that commission off of you, the lifetime costs of that can reduce your nest egg by 20, 30%. So tens of billions of dollars at stake. And we attempted to put in place a new rule. And how were we able to do it? It was critically important to have everyone at the table. And I will say this, a graduate of Brown University, one of the companies that ended up supporting our rule, it's a guy named Brian Moynihan, CEO of B of A, who owns Merrill. There's a guy named Jack Bogle, anyone who knows him, basically founded Vanguard, invented mutual funds. Slight overstatement, but not that far of an overstatement. And he said, you know, I've learned that when you put your customers first, it's great for your customers, and it's even better for business. Those weren't my words. Those were his words. And so when you're moving forward on something like this, and by the way, industry spent over $100 million to try to defeat us because there was a lot at stake for them if they had to actually, God forbid, put their clients' best interests first. So our key to success in that was to make sure we built a big table. We marshaled the facts. We marshaled the aggregate data. But then we had very specific examples of people who had gotten screwed, like the Toffels. This guy was an electrician. He did everything right. World War II veteran. Works for 40 years. He invested his own stuff, and he was very smart, but he started getting dementia. His wife goes to the local bank that they had banked at. She says, we need help managing his money, and he had like $500,000 saved up. You know, nice nest egg. And he's 70 some odd years old. They put him into what's called a variable annuity. Very dangerous. And the cost, the annual cost of this instrument that they put him in was $25,000. The annual cost. You could buy a new car every year for the cost that they were getting. And by the way, annuity, when a guy's 74 years old, he has dementia, he died 3 or 4 years later, but that was suitable. And so when we do this, and I made a short story long, but it's so important for success to make sure you're building that big table, to make sure you're marshaling the evidence. And our final rule was far different than our initial rule because folks had good ideas, and in the end of the day, they embraced it. And with the efforts that are underway in our context to do away with it, the business community has continued to say to me, we're moving forward because it's the right thing to do.
So Tom and Gina, let me ask, you've both described policies that were well thought out, backed by fact and science, evidence, ones that were inclusive in terms of the voices and stakeholders. So how did we get from that to a situation, say, where the EPA is framed as engaging in war against America or war against the middle class, or where these policies are presented, maybe not with facts, but certainly with emotion, as some kind of egregious violation, not just of common sense, but egregious violation of the Constitution. And same with the Department of Labor, that this is government run rampant against the citizenry. How did we get to that political framing?
Sheesh, that's an easy answer. You know, Tom and I used to have bets on who would get more riders on the budget, Department of Labor or EPA, or who would be called in for more hearings. I think I won, but it was close. It was close. I don't know. The environment has never really been a partisan issue. You know, it's never easy during a down economy to talk about environmental protection. I've known that for as long as I've been in the business, which is my whole life. And we went in at a time when it was the worst economy, the crash than we had seen since the 30s. And so I expected that there'd be difficulties, but we ended up getting remarkably more done than anybody ever anticipated because we worked hard at it. Now, why is it partisan? I think a lot of it had to do with the issue of climate change. I really do. I think it had to do with big money trying to preserve the status quo, mostly the fossil fuel industry, that very strategically got people into Congress and into local legislatures that would deny climate change or deny the ability to take action on it. Now, I know that sounds very simplistic, but I think that there is a good indication that a lot of it was driven by climate change, not necessarily by the core protections of the agency, but the core protections of the agency are all threatened by climate change. That's the problem that we face. It is fundamentally a public health and even an existential challenge. And you can't back off of it just because it's difficult to communicate, which it is. But it is necessary for us to take action. So the best we could do was to try to work across the aisle in a nonpartisan way to look at the facts and to try to get movement forward. And we didn't try to solve the climate problem in one or two actions. We worked, for example, with the auto industry every step of the way, and they actually stood up on stages applauding the standards we did. That doesn't happen very often. Now you're going to say, yeah, but they don't like them now. I disagree with you. They actually do still agree with the standards. It just appears that this administration wants to undo them. And I don't think at the behest or the benefit of the current makers themselves.
You know, we live in a world of false choices, and I've watched this throughout the arc of my career. I used to do a lot of work with police departments that had some challenges, and the false choice there is we either have a safe community or we protect the Constitution, a quintessentially false choice. The robust evidence base that shows that we can have safe constitutional policing. The most important currency a police officer has is the trust of her community, and if you don't have trust, you don't have anything. In the world of when we would do an overtime rule or some other rule to help lift wages, because wage stagnation is one of the fundamental issues that has been vexing America and frustrating families and leading to this understandable angst. And, oh, I either take care of my worker or I take care of my shareholder. The quintessential false choice. The Costco's of the world have demonstrated that you can take care of your worker and your shareholder and your supply chain and your customer all at once. When I settled one of the largest fair lending cases in the history of the Fair Housing Act, I sat down with the CEO of this recognizable company who shall go unnamed, and he said to me, and this was rampant issues of fair lending discrimination against Latino and African American would-be homeowners. And it was in 2010 or so. I'm having these conversations with this CEO, and we got to be friends. And he said to me, you know what our problem was, Tom? Is during the previous administration, there was no enforcement whatsoever. It was the wild, wild west. And we were losing our best people to Countrywide. And those of you who followed mortgage lending, the industry bottom feeder was Countrywide. People would go there, work for 2 or 3 years, and be set for life because they had no rules. And they would be set for life because they would screw people. And it was a race to the bottom. So this notion that you either have a sound business climate for lenders, or you protect the environment, or you protect the consumer protection infrastructure is another false choice. And we see it played out everywhere. The absence of regulation in the fair lending context, the wild, wild west, is what exacerbated the problem. And here was a CEO calling for common sense oversight of the industry. And so we have to stop buying into these false choice scenarios that are being offered now once again. It's just dead wrong.
But what I was trying to tell the students, Ed, earlier is that there are many, many, many Republicans, even Republicans in the Congress of the United States, who would love to not have climate change be the part of the platform of the Republican Party. Climate change denial is what I should say. They understand what's going on. So there needs to be a more of a realistic conversation about things than just making science fact to be part of a partisan platform. It just doesn't make any sense.
Right, and how does one get to that goal? So Tom, you referred to false choice, and that makes sense to me, but that false choice, it is the choice right now politically. In other words, I mean, in an earlier lecture at the Watson Institute, Watson Senior Fellow and former Ambassador Chaz Freeman talked about in diplomacy, when you run into a wall and you can't get any farther with negotiations, sometimes you just have to change the question. And so it sounds like that's also what you're saying, that there's a choice that's presented. It's not the optimal choice. So how do you change the question? How do you change the choice, whether you're a Republican or a Democrat?
Well, I guess I would. I think what we have to do is change the map, and here's what I mean by that. I think the two forces that have brought democracy to the crisis level that we find it, or two of the greatest forces, are dark money and gerrymandering, partisan or racial. And the reason we get in these false choice traps, and I'll give you a very concrete example, immigration reform, 2013. Bipartisan immigration reform passes the United States Senate by a comfortable margin, gets to the U.S. House of Representatives in 2014. There's a fragile majority emerging to pass immigration reform in 2014. And then the following thing happens in the summer of 2014. A guy named Eric Cantor got a primary election in Virginia. He's so confident of his victory that he wasn't even in his district the day of his election. His pollster had him up by 20. I guess probably his ex-pollster. And he lost by 20 or something like that. And everybody got spooked on the Republican side. The Tea Party folks, a few of whom were willing to just vote and get this over with, they got spooked. Why is this relevant to this conversation? They were the Tea Party folks who refused to support the DREAM Act, refused to support that immigration reform, in a sense, are acting rationally. And what do I mean by that? If you define rationality as, I want to get reelected, they were acting rationally because their districts are so heavily gerrymandered that their only worry is a challenge to their right. And so if you want to talk about the people who are telling her in secret, telling her, I'm going to deny this under oath, Gina, But I will tell you in secret, climate change is real. I know that, but I can't say that publicly because I'll get a primary challenger. I can't vote for the DREAM Act because I'm going to get a primary challenger. And the list goes on. I can't vote for comprehensive immigration reform because I'll get a primary challenger. Barack Obama won Pennsylvania by 5.5 points in 2012. The 18 members of the Democratic Party running for the congressional seats won 51% of the vote, something like that. I'm off by 0.5% maybe. They won 5 out of the 18 seats because we live in a world right now where we have allowed the elected officials to pick their constituents rather than vice versa. And unless and until we reverse that in the U.S. Congress, we're going to continue to have this gridlock that's going to make life a lot more difficult.
I should ask you all who have questions, please start lining up behind the microphones. I'm going to ask one more question, and then we'll turn it over to you. Gina and Tom, many of your achievements in the Obama administration were carried out through executive action. And many of the actions that we see now are being carried out through executive action in the Trump administration. Can you describe to me how you assess and evaluate this shift that seems to have happened in American politics toward much more executive power and much less congressional action on basic regulation? Where are we headed?
Congress doesn't do anything. It's really quite a short
See,
answer.
answer to my last question. Answer to your last question that I just gave.
Should that be the operating assumption?
Can I make a distinction here? And for me, it's important, is because I hear this a lot about EPA was over the top, you know, outside of the boundaries of the law. We were just using executive authority. Well, I was in the executive branch of government, right? But I used rulemaking authority. I used the laws that Congress gave me and the responsibility under that law to do the job I was supposed to do. It was not by executive order. It was by rules. And one of the reasons why I make that distinction is an executive order does not hold the weight of law. And so we were not winging it, folks. We were going through the rigorous rulemaking process that's required. And the reason why that's important is not just because I think we did it well, but I think this administration thinks they can rule by executive order and that they can do a shoddy job on rulemaking to just confirm what the President of the United States wants. And for that reason, I don't think they're going to be successful in rolling back the work that we did. They're simply not working hard enough. And they've been sued 8 times, and 8 times back to the agency saying you can't take shortcuts. There happens to be a process for this that's written into law, and you got to follow it. So I'm proud of the work we did, and I think it will set us up for I think success in the courts as these things continue to roll through.
I mean, remember, Mitch McConnell said, "My goal is to make him a one-term president." I worked for a guy named Ted Kennedy. Ted Kennedy was a remarkably proud, progressive Democrat, and he was also a problem solver. He understood that idealism and pragmatism were not mutually exclusive. If a Republican got elected president, he looked at it as his obligation to try to find common ground, and he frequently did. There was no interest in common ground. I am convinced beyond a shadow of a doubt today that if it said Obama on it, then we must get rid of it.
That's it. That's the only thing.
And that is the operating principle. And so we were left with no choice but to do what we did, how we did it. The challenge that we have now that is increasing with every passing month is more and more judges are being appointed by this administration. And we've run into a buzzsaw of sorts on a couple of these matters, and I mean you had a nominee the other day who testified at her hearing that she was asked what she thought of Brown versus Board of Education, and she's not sure whether she agreed with it. So there you have it,
She could be the Secretary of Education then.
maybe she is. I'm not sure. She doesn't believe in public education either.
Why don't we go to some of your questions? We'll start over here. Please try to keep your questions short. Thanks.
Hi, thank you both for your time. One of my concerns going forward, like you said, is that our agencies are currently being gutted from the inside. We are losing the long-term personnel, the experience. Chaz Freeman has spoken of this, was mentioned speaking of it for State Department's been gutted, the EPA is being gutted. I speak as a veteran who left service because I also could not morally continue to serve this administration. What do we do after this? How do we get back that experience? How do we prevent the brain drain that has significant impact if we don't try to mitigate it?
Well, first of all, sir, thank you for your service. I'm
Thank
very
you.
grateful. And I think I probably speak for Gina. We still run into former colleagues, and the first thing I always say to them is, stick around. I'm proud to tell you, I came into federal service as a career prosecutor at the Justice Department under President George Herbert Walker Bush. I'm proud to tell you that. I was proud to serve under him. And the Department of Justice under Obama, Bush, Bush 2, actually I wasn't there under Bush 2, but Bush 1 and Obama and Clinton, independence was its currency. And I think that you have put your finger on a really important issue, because they want people to leave, and then they're not going to fill the positions, and that's one of those issues where there's going to be there could still be residual impact moving forward after this administration ends. And so I've been doing, and I know all of my other colleagues in the cabinet say the same thing to their folks: stick around. It's easy for me to say, but. One of the reasons it's really important to stick around is there are so few senior positions filled right now that there is still actually some opportunity to continue making decisions with the career civil servants. And I think I don't have the best answer for your question, because there is an undeniable brain drain that is occurring. There are people who are saying no mas, and I can't blame them. But what I am doing is continuing to advocate the ones I still hear from, that they stick around. And I don't begrudge you a moment, because in the end of the day, it's following your conscience. And implicit in your question was, your conscience told you had to move out. And one of the reasons why we have so many service members running for office from on the Democratic side right now is because the assault on the intelligence community, the fact that our nation is less safe. When you stab your allies in the back and you cozy up with your adversaries, when you become Putin's poodle, when you say nice things, when you cozy up to Duterte, and the list goes on. That doesn't make America safer. It makes America more vulnerable. And that's why we are seeing right now so many service members with spectacular credentials running for office. And again, that's not a good answer to your question. I think the honest answer to your question, and I saw this when I re-entered the Civil Rights Division in 2009. We lost a lot of good people during the Bush administration because they tried to gut civil rights, and they almost succeeded. And so what I had to do was rebuild, and it took time, and that is going to be part of the challenge. Pruitt, I'm sure, would like nothing more than the SES, the Senior Executive Service, to leave.
I probably worry about a lot of things, but one of the three things about EPA is I just feel terrible for the career staff now. I've never seen any people treated with such disdain who did not deserve it. And I was at an event in Washington yesterday, and I saw an EPA person, and they came up. It was this young woman, and she came up and gave me a hug, and she said, "I miss you," and she started crying. I'm like, oh, if this is what you're doing to people who are public servants, whose sole, problem that you worry about is they actually wanted to serve the public, it's amazing to me. So that worries me. The second is that most of the people leaving are the scientists because they are totally under attack, as is the science. That's why I went to the School of Public Health at Harvard, because I only know one thing to do, and that's yap away as much as I can in support of science, and I'm a good yapper. But the other thing is that I just want to make sure that good science is given to decision makers. If it's not government, and someone else is going to make that decision. And it's going to be cities and states, and it's going to be the business community. So one of the things you may see is others step up at a time when Washington is asleep. And I'm seeing that. I wish it was more, but I'm seeing it. So there's some reason for hope. The third thing is that I really worry that this is the first administration that I'm aware of whose sole path forward was to go backwards. They have no vision for the future. EPA, Scott Pruitt has never talked about how we are going to improve public health and the environment, which is the mission of the agency. My Republican colleagues that were EPA administrators are just beside themselves about this. They've never seen anything like it. And I worry that this is going to be the tail. Now we're going to not only have a Congress that doesn't work, but we're going to have an executive branch that just undoes what the other one did. That would mean that we essentially have no regulatory path. We have no regulation if there can't be a level of certainty that what has gone through the process well, that's been defined by fact and the law and the science, is not going to be retained. You just can't have it. And that's the things I worry about. Other than my daughter is really interested in, no, I'm only kidding. That's my own personal problem.
Thank you both so much for your time.
Question over here.
Autonomous vehicles become more and more prevalent. The 3% of the American workforce that drives for a living feel that their jobs may be, they may be out of work within a decade. Do you view this current period of automation as exceptional in history or part of a larger trend? And then from an environmental perspective, how do you think the shifting incentives of autonomous vehicles will change environmental issues with driving as public transportation may become less prevalent?
Well, I do think that automation is inevitable. Whether it's inevitable in the car sector or when, I don't know, but it seems to be something, it's a fact of life that we have to figure out how to do, and people have to, I think, reconcile themselves to it. It's not my favorite path forward, but I think it exists, and we have to figure it out. Whether or not autonomous vehicles are actually a benefit to the environment depends on what powers them. If they're electric vehicles and you get your electricity from renewable energy, then you have a very environmentally sound process. I can't imagine, however, with 9.6 billion people expected in 2050, 2/3 of them are going to live in an urban area, that you're actually going to fit that many vehicles on any roadway. So I cannot see that it's going to replace the need for really good public transportation. That is where we have to get to, and this country has been slower than most in making that adjustment.
We did a lot of thinking, and we convened a number of conferences on the future of work when I had the privilege of being labor secretary. And when I was labor secretary in Maryland, I used to say the quickest way to punch your ticket to the middle class was to get a commercial driver's license, because you take a 12-week course, you're up and running, and you're making good money. I don't say that with the same frequency now, because I don't know where that will be in 5 to 10 years. But what we can learn from life experience from the past is when you had the Industrial Revolution of the late 19th century, people were asking the same question. What does this mean for the future workforce? And what ensued was a many-decade battle and discussion about what the social compact of the 21st century would be. And the one thing that I think has to be one of our core values as a nation is that we have to equip people with the skills to succeed today and the core competencies to adjust to the one constant that we know will exist in the 21st century, and that is change. I told a story before about in West Virginia in coal country. We were a public sector venture capitalist. We invested in displaced coal miners. And I went to a place in Pikesville, Kentucky, the heart of coal country, a startup called BitSource. And I met with about 15 of their new employees. They were learning how to code. The motto of the company was from coal to code. These were all displaced coal miners. And what impressed me so much about them was their determination. I told the story earlier today. This one guy had a screensaver of his 2-year-old on the computer. I said, "Who's that?" "Oh, that's my son." Someday, this guy told me, he's going to come to me and say, "Daddy, I can't do this. I don't know how." And I'm going to be able to look him in the eye and say, "You know, son, 8 years ago, I didn't know how to turn on a computer, and now I'm a coder, and I'm providing for you." And to me, I have always been just so awed by the resilience of the American workforce. And I think what we have to do in the public sector is to make sure we equip everyone with the skills to thrive today and the core competencies to continue, because change is scary. And we have to build those bridges to the middle class to continue to stay in the middle class. And I think we can do it. And that's why investments in human capital, when we talk about infrastructure bills, I'm all for infrastructure bills, but we've also got to make sure we have a permanent human infrastructure bill that recognizes the fear that is implicit in your question, because it's a totally fair concern to have. And that's why we got to keep doing it.
You see full employment as a possibility in the 21st century?
Well, we're at 4.1% right now. So right now, in communities across the country, the conversations I have more frequently are about a worker shortage. And what we have to do is make sure that we match the skills needs that exist today with the talent pool. That's a huge challenge here in Rhode Island. That's what Governor Raimondo is doing a lot of very successful work on, because we don't make jewelry anymore in Rhode Island. And we've got to prepare people for the jobs of the 21st century.
Great.
Thank you.
Thanks. Question?
Thank you so much for being here. Last week I was at a talk put on by the Watson Institute with author Ira Shapiro, and one of the panelists made the point that in the coming years, 30% of the US population will elect 70% of the US Senate. So my question for you is, how do you see the Senate, which is supposed to be the more bipartisan chamber, functioning with that disparity?
Can you explain the premise of your question one more time?
Yeah, so, I mean, in terms of the EPA, which relies on the Senate to confirm judges that will then uphold their regulations.
No, I get that, but the 30 and 70%, I get the other part of your question.
Because there's
of
a
where
stat,
people live.
Yeah, where people live, people are moving into more urban, centers, and it's said that by 2040, 30% of the U.S. population will be electing 70% of the U.S. Senate. That was a fact.
Yeah, I mean, in other words, California has 2 senators and Wyoming has 2 senators.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Well, you have to take that up with Ben Franklin, but I don't know that he's around. And California has 58 representatives or something like that, and Wyoming has 1. I mean, one thing that I would simply observe that is not completely responsive to your question, but it applies everywhere, is we ought to be making it easier for people to vote, regardless of whether you live in Wyoming or whether you live in California. And it's unconscionable, and I spent a lot of time prosecuting voting rights cases, that the playbook of the Republican Party is to make it harder for eligible people to vote. And they're not shy about it. Google Paul Weyrich, W-E-Y-R-I-C-H. Paul Weyrich voting. You will get a 41-second video in which he says, "I don't want everyone to vote. I want less people to vote, because we do better when less people vote." That is unconscionable and un-American. And that is the reality. I don't know that there's an answer to your question unless you want to amend the Constitution to say that a state like California should have 3 senators. I do think that an interesting corollary to your question as it relates to the presidency is whether we should be doing something about the Electoral College, and whether we should be moving into the national popular vote. And a number of states, the first of which was Maryland, passed a law that said we will direct our electors to vote for the person who won the popular vote, as long as states totaling 270 electoral votes do the same. That doesn't address your Senate issue, but it does address the reality. And I don't think what happened in 2016 and what happened in 2000 are going to be the last time they're going to happen because of the phenomena you described.
You want to comment on that?
Nope.
No? Okay.
Hi, so first off, thank you very much for being here. And Mr. Perez, you mentioned that some congressmen and women say that they can't endorse issues like global warming or immigration because it will draw a challenger in their primary election. And my question is, with this in mind, what do you both think the solution to the extremely polarized atmosphere of Congress, where congressmen and women can't endorse policies because they believe in this risk of a more polarized challenger coming in from within the party?
Gina, why don't you go ahead?
It was him who said it.
All right.
Well, I'll tell you, I mean, it starts with the Supreme Court cases out of Wisconsin and Maryland on partisan gerrymandering. Justice Kennedy is going to be the swing vote. I am hopeful that he will strike down. I mean, I gave you the example of Pennsylvania. I could have chosen Ohio. I could have chosen Michigan. Could have chosen Wisconsin. Could have chosen Maryland. Maryland's a partisan gerrymander that benefited Democrats. So this is not, it's sauce for the goose type of thing. But, frankly, until we do that, there's no political incentive for people to want to engage these issues, and that's the nub of the problem.
The only thing I would make sure to add, and this is just so that everybody understands, is that when you set up a district, a voting district, that is solely one-dimensional, all white, all Republican, you're setting yourself up for this type of challenge. And so I think we just need to be much more aggressive at making sure that things are drawn in a way that is not political and not so inequitable.
I mean, the other dimension to the answer, too, is, I saw it firsthand with the conflict of interest rule that I described before. It's the poster child for campaign finance reform. We pulled the campaign finance reports of some of the people who are most vociferous opponents, and it was not hard to figure out the connection there. And it's not hard to understand why people feel so jaded about Washington, because like that tax bill, it's not a tax reform bill, the tax bill that passed last year, I mean, the amount of money that lobbyists made on that bill was just off the charts.
Question here?
Yes, thank you for taking my question. What, if any, specific challenges to the Obama legacy are you worried or concerned about may have or gain significant traction?
Nothing in the world of EPA. I don't think there's anything. I think but in the larger context, what worries me the most is that, one of the things that we've been struggling as public employees is the credibility of government issue. The fact that, we're all seen now as living in a swamp. It doesn't help to have Pruitt be the poster child of that. We're getting to a level of discourse that is just phenomenally bad, and a sense of we're just numb to all of the damage that we're doing to government itself and to public employees. I take pride, and always have, in the work that I did. I took pride in not being partisan. I don't dismiss anybody's judgment. I give it thought. And that's what you're supposed to do. I worry that this has eroded to a level where it's going to take considerable time to bounce back, if it does.
Gina, just a quick question on the Paris Agreement. How, with countries already arguably responding to the U.S. stated withdrawal, how does that not end up playing out in the future as a reversal, really, of the achievements of the Obama administration?
Well, you know, it is absolutely going to be a delay. You know, that's the problem that I get anxious about, because some things actually need to continue to move forward. And it's really important on climate that we continue. And so you do see the international community responding to the U.S.'s supposed withdrawal at some point in time. But you never know. It could be like TPP. We could be in tomorrow. I don't know. I mean, just keep reading Twitter. You never know. So you're absolutely right. It is delaying. But the most important thing that this administration is not seeing is that it's given China an unbelievable ability for leadership in the economy and strength of the world. We have ceded our innovation and our jobs to other countries, and it's just embarrassing. And I think I worry about that a lot, because I don't know how we regroup when we're not investing, when we're not continuing to grow the jobs here, and when you have markets really that are being managed elsewhere and drawing our businesses there.
I do worry about the Obama legacy on a number of things I worked on. We're going to have to go back and do the overtime rule again when we get back in control, and we will get back in control. We have other rules that are being chipped away at, although so many of them I think are going to endure. The other dimension, though, is, I mean, there's this global virus of nativism that is, you see it in Europe, you see it in Austria, you see it in Hungary, you see it in the emergence of the opposition party in Germany, you see it in Poland, you see it in the Philippines, you see it in Malaysia, you see it in Turkey, and I could keep going. And what we had historically during periods like this was the moral authority of the United States. Yeah. And it's not there. And I've been speaking to some friends in the UK, and every time you say, hi, I'm so-and-so, I'm American, and I didn't vote for him. We have, on the issues of human rights, we've abdicated. There's no moral authority there. And then I worry here at home, and this isn't chipping away at the Obama legacy, but this is just the normalization of ethics violations, the normalization of lying, the normalization of misogyny. This is conduct unbecoming a president, conduct unbecoming a person anywhere, and we can't normalize fake news. The truth matters, science matters, civility matters. And I fear that people are going to look at that and say, this is okay. This is not okay.
Thank you. Question over here. She's there. Okay, go ahead.
Thank you. Getting tired. Thank you for being here. I came down from Massachusetts. Yay.
Want to ride home?
And in the area that I'm in, we just got a new state senator, a new rep, and the guy who stepped down from the state rep job is now the new mayor, and they're all blue. And one of them has been helping me with a girl who I just bumped into who was about to die from heroin addiction, and we're trying to get her a bed. So my state senator, who I helped to get elected, is working really hard. The last 3 days we've been trying to do this. So many young folks in their 20s, when I asked them about when I was canvassing and campaigning, even with my cast on, said they weren't registered to vote. Oh, nobody's going to listen to me. I said, I'm listening to you. I'm right here. But when I made it personal and told them I had a work-related injury from a big corporation who denied my care, 9 years of fighting, and I'm finally winning. But now I'm disabled, and probably not fixable. So big corporation, Home Depot, I get to say it now because I won, and Liberty Mutual denied everything. So I'm going to work with Mr. Feeney on the State House, and we're going to work on workers' rights and health care. But you've got to get out and get busy, and you got to get out and help us win these races and get local.
Can I just make one point? It matters to make issues personal. It really does, because I think people are so disenfranchised with government that whatever happens, it just seems like business as usual now. And we're leaving human beings behind. The reason why the environment is important is because it's about your kids' family and their future.
Yes, well, I don't have kids, but I'm an environmentalist, and so I work with the Citizens for Social Justice up there.
All right, my kids' family.
Yes.
My kids' family.
But I tell them that I'm doing this for your kids.
Exactly.
And to have, I got to drink out of creeks up in upstate New York. I got to go camping and see wildlife. I'm worried there won't be any left. So the thought that the polar bear is not going to be around and I still will be is really scary. And this administration hopefully will motivate folks to get out and get these people elected who do care and will change it. So that's my hope, and thank you all for everything you do.
Les, thank you for coming here. Thank you for your activism. I see it all over the country. I see it in Oklahoma with school teachers. I see it in West Virginia with school teachers.
Yeah.
I see it in Florida with young people. And I was in Memphis last week marking the 50th anniversary of Dr. King's assassination. And the reason I ran for this job is I have come to the conclusion that the most important thing I could do at this moment, where our democracy is facing an enormous stress test, is to make sure that we're electing Democrats and to make sure we're rebuilding our political infrastructure, rebuilding trust. Our signature initiative for 2018 is iwillvote.com. There were 47 million less people who voted in 2014 than in 2012. Voting cannot be a casual sport. Yeah. Democracy cannot be a spectator sport. And the good news is that I see it everywhere I go. Turnout is up. The number of candidates are up. The number of service members running for office is up. The number of women leading the charge is way up.
Thank
because
God.
Women led
Thank
this
God.
resistance, and young people are taking leadership. And to me, the legacy of Dr. King is we need to be bold. Yeah. We need to be inclusive, and we need to vote. And that's why our goal is to get 50 million, honoring the 50th anniversary of Dr. King, 50 million more folks out to vote. Yeah. And, the First Lady used to say, when they go low,
we go higher.
Well, you know what? I have a little, when they go low, we go vote. So that's my motto.
Yes. Time is getting a little short, so we'll try to have a little bit shorter answers and quick questions. Go ahead.
Okay, so when Steve Bannon put on his 3 or 4 shirts and went to CPAC, last year and said, we're going to preside over the deconstruction of the administrative state, like a lot of my friends, we sort of said, well, that's kind of silly. But I think what we're seeing is that our institutions are surprisingly fragile. So you've touched on this several times, but the arbitrariness and how quickly things can be reversed with either executive action or especially with administrative rules and regulations. If Mick Mulvaney can say the budget for the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau is 0, and if Scott Pruitt can mint his own coins and gut the department and reverse all these rules, it seems to me that there aren't enough things that are a matter of statute and that there are things that are just, again, our government is complex, we live in a tough world. I'm interested in your best ideas about how government and these institutions can actually be more resilient, because they seem to be, overturned on a dime, and you don't want to cycle from administration to administration in these ways anymore.
I don't actually think they're having as much success as your question might indicate, because they've done it in such a
Tom. That's troubling. I mean,
that's a ham-handed. They have been so sloppy in what they have done that, quite frankly, there was an article in the New York Times Sunday about it. But have they had some success? Absolutely. I think the longer-term answer is we've got to fix our democracy more broadly. And I get back to the Congress. We did what we did in no small measure because we had a group of people saying, I want him to be a one-term president. And so we had only that option.
Tell me your best idea.
One question.
Our best idea is to redistrict so that people have to get things done in Congress. There's no incentive to legislate right now. And so we use the more fragile and the less permanent regulatory and other administrative routes. We've got to fix Congress, or else we'll keep working around it, and it's not permanent.
Could I just mention
Less permanent.
One word, transparency. I still have faith in people. I don't care if you're Republican or Democrat. I still have faith in people, and the challenge that we have with this administration is a lack of transparency. There are statutes, there are laws on the books. The biggest thing that ticks me off is they're not enforcing them. That's what they're doing at EPA, is I can't fix a law I don't like, so instead I'm going to pretend that I'm doing all my work right, and I'm going to undermine it and not enforce it and let the industry know, and there's a wink wink going on. We need transparency in government. We need exactly what's happening, which is everybody standing up and reminding everybody that we have core values in this country and they're not being represented in government today. I don't know any other way to get at these issues other than to give people the information they need to vote correctly and to engage and to run for office and to do everything we can to take back America.
Thank you. Galen.
Hi. First, thanks for being here. Mr. Perez, you mentioned earlier, you said when the Democrats regain control, right? And maybe this question might be a bit redundant because we've been touching on this, but you've also both mentioned your worries with the government right now losing credibility because they don't seem to have a vision for the future necessarily, and sort of a lot of initiative is moving towards states and also companies sort of keep moving forward while the government is trying to reverse direction. Do you think that'll be damaging to the American people's view of the government past this administration, like maybe when the Democrats do regain control, and how do you think that you can fix that damage?
Yes, and I don't know.
Okay.
I think this is a resilient democracy, and I have such faith in the American people. If you asked me to give a two-word definition or description of America, I'd say endless possibilities. I say that because I had the privilege of traveling the country. I met people who'd been kicked to the side of the road, and they had the resilience to get up. Those coal miners in West Virginia, folks who'd lost their job in Ohio, people who were struggling with opioid abuse, who were able to get the treatment and get their lives together. And this isn't the first time in the nation's journey to form a more perfect union that we've had this. The McCarthy era, we've faced other moments of nativism, and so I for one,
I'm not related to that McCarthy. I just want that very
well.
Dad was such a jerk sometimes.
Yeah. But the main thing is we can do this, but it has to be a full participation sport, democracy, by everyone. And the good news is I'm seeing it in remarkable abundance. The energy, it's not abating. People understand you can't take democracy for granted any longer.
I have to say, I might sound like all I'm doing is whining, but I'm incredibly hopeful. I actually see signs that people are beginning to act like they need to act, which is with passion. I haven't been to a march in decades before the Women's March. And my favorite poster was, I can't believe we have to keep marching for this shit. Don't you love that? It's so good. It was the best thing. You got the Science March coming up this weekend. People are taking to the streets. If you want to see what America is, that's what it is. That's what it is. And you just gotta understand that you gotta work at this. It's endless work, but it's worth it. And there's no way that I think this administration is going to take down the United States of America or tell us that we don't value the things that we do, period.
Isn't the one way to interpret the Trump victory is people were frustrated by Republican administrations, Democratic administrations, so restoration to what, really? I mean, what really is the answer beyond change? In other words, return doesn't seem to be a political solution that anybody was particularly interested in the 2016 election.
I mean, we can't focus on yesterday. We have to focus on tomorrow. That is, and the person who asked about autonomous vehicles, his question is about what is our tomorrow going to look like for people who drive right now, whether it's a CDL or an Uber. What is tomorrow going to look like for that coal miner? Because I'm confident that it's not going to be, we're going to create 10 million coal jobs. I think it's so critically important to be honest with people. People can handle the truth, But in addition to being honest, we have to help folks and make sure we're building those ladders of opportunity so that everyone can punch their ticket to the middle class. And we have to do what Dr. King did. He was bold. He passes the Civil Rights Act of '64. And what does he, take a victory lap, sit down? No, he goes right back to LBJ and says, I need a Voting Rights Act. And they kept marching. We need to aim high. And we've done that throughout this nation's journey to form a more perfect union. And we can do that now. We need to make college affordable for everyone who can't, because the term educational mortgage should be eliminated from our lexicon. And it can be eliminated from our lexicon without breaking the bank. We can address climate change. We can do all these things. We've just got to continue to think bold and move away from this us against them. You know, when you blow your neighbor's candle out, it doesn't make your candle shine any brighter. And that's the reality of their operating philosophy. We can shine everyone's candles.
Can I just mention that it could honestly be as simple as this, just to get us started, is you should hang out with people who disagree with you. Since when do I get to demand what everybody else thinks? You know, let's talk about what we care about, not what our position paper says. You know, I think students have to really start thinking about this, because places like Brown and places like Harvard, where I am, you know, they're very liberal. They tend to look down their nose at conservatives, where they look at Republicans as being anti-environment, when I've worked with a ton of them, and they're not. You know, we just have to get a grip on one another. Well, maybe not. There are a few
That was a metaphorical
there are a few
statement for
people
the
I
record.
would like to grip about their neck and head, but no. We just have to get a grip on ourselves and start talking to each other again. You know, go have Thanksgiving dinner with your family, even if they don't agree with you politically, for crying out loud.
Yeah, Mr. Perez, you've discussed the disproportionate influence that you believe dark money has had on recent political election cycles and our political system as of late. So I was just wondering what your thoughts are on the U.S. Supreme Court Citizens United ruling and the role that money now plays in funding political campaigns, specifically in your role as the chairman of the DNC. Like, do you think that political speech should be protected in terms of like money and funding certain campaigns?
So you've both expressed a lot of optimism today about the resiliency of the Obama legacy, but I feel like that was not what I came in here expecting, because I hear so much pessimism amongst my peers and in the media about how hard hit the legacy is being by the Trump policies. So how do you think that mismatch between your optimism and sort of everyone else's pessimism has come about, and what can we do about that?
Thank you.
When or how do you think environmental concerns became partisan issues? You just mentioned you worked with a lot of Republicans who are for the environment. Of course, Nixon founded the EPA, and just wondering.
He was great, right?
Well, how did it happen?
Why don't you do, I'll leave the third one to you. Okay. And I'll do the first one. Okay. Dark money, and we can both do the second one.
Well, the second one, I'd just say get over it. I mean, really, get a hold, get over it.
That's why I love her.
I asked for brief answers.
No, I mean, I think, you know, again, dark money brought to us by Citizens United and gerrymandering, partisan and racial, have been two of the most significant forces that have brought our democracy to its knees. I live in Maryland. On our county council, in our county, we put in place a campaign finance bill. If you raise something like if you get X hundred donors of $250 or less, they match it 6-to-1. We have 39 candidates running for office because we've democratized the process of running for office. You don't have to be a millionaire or a billionaire to run for office. I think that is what America is all about and should be all about. Unfortunately, this court will not, you know, we're in trouble until we have people on the Supreme Court who understand that. It's been a terribly dark force. As to the question about legacy, I mean, I look at the Affordable Care Act. What a resilient bill. I mean, and the number one issue that has had Democrats winning over the last year, whether it was Virginia, New Jersey, whether it was Doug Jones in Alabama, whether it was Connor Lamb in Pennsylvania, the number one issue is health care. And the mistake, among others, that the other side made is they believe their own propaganda. Oh, the Affordable Care Act's a job killer. Oh, the Affordable Care Act's a killer generally. It is not. It's been saving lives. Talk to the person struggling with opioid addiction who relies on Medicaid, and something like 2/3 of people treated for opioid addiction get funded through Medicaid. And so, you know, yeah, we've taken some hits at the Labor Department. Does it break my heart? Yeah. Does it strengthen my resolve? Hell yeah. And so I understand that some people feel pessimism, but, you know, we can either fret or we can fight. I chose to fight. And we keep fighting, and we keep winning a lot of battles. And I guarantee you we're going to keep fighting. And not just fighting against them. And that's where we sometimes, you know, sometimes I see too many people talk about the president too much instead of talking about what we stand for. I'm proud to be a Democrat because we've had people's backs on the issues that matter most. We have your back on health care. We have your back on good jobs. We have your back on women's reproductive health. We have immigrants' backs. You know, we believe that our diversity is what has always made America great. And so, you know, when we continue to lead with those values, I think we do quite well. And when we put hope on the ballot, we win. And when we allow others to make us hangdog, that's when we start turning against each other. And I refuse to let that happen.
You know, and I won't touch the Citizens United thing because that's pretty clear. But on the issue of everybody feeling badly, I get the same reaction everywhere. Is I can't believe you're okay. Like they think I'm just destitute now, just in this constant state of depression, and I'm not. I'm pissed off. That's what I do. You know, I just get ticked off that these things are happening, but all they're doing is claiming success that is nowhere near the finish line. And you have to just cut through that and do a little bit more work to see, you know, everybody says, oh, the cars now, all that's done. That wasn't even a beginning of a rule. It was like a statement. You know, so, oh, I can make statements. And I remember the president going around going, isn't it great we dropped out of Paris? You can't even start that for 3 years. You know, so you just got to not let them make false statements that take away your energy and your enthusiasm and your hope. Even if they were right, you cannot let them win. And that's what you do if you get depressed. I've spent many evenings watching Netflix, eating ice cream, and watching 7 years of Game of Thrones. You just can't keep doing that, I'll guarantee it. Not without totally new clothing. And on the environment, I'd be damned if I know how they succeeded in making it as partisan as it is. But, you know, I think that climate change has had, as I said earlier, a lot to do with it because it's complicated. And it is a fundamental shift in the way in which our world has energized itself. It's supposed to be hard to make change in this country. That's what drove me crazy when I was doing rules because I couldn't get them done quick. It's now what I rely on that's holding change back. And so change is hard in a democracy. It's meant to. It's going to be a very challenging issue for a long time. But I have to have faith that the United States is going to lead that charge again.
Just a quick final question. Forgive me if it sounds cliche, but it's truly heartfelt. For a young college Republican, a young college Democrat, or even somebody from not from the United States who at this moment wants to do something, throw out some ideas about where he or she should start. Where to start?
Number 1, register to vote. Number 2, vote. Number 3, study about who you're voting for.
How about professionally, though?
Oh, okay, professionally.
Career track.
Well, I wouldn't suggest you be in a voting booth for that. I would suggest that I still think in this, you may think that's crazy, but if you care about the environmental world, there are many things that you can do both personally and professionally. Professionally, I still would consider public service. I still think it's one of the most honorable professions that you can do. I still think that there's a wealth of progress that we can make both in the city level and the state level. I don't think you're going to see much change in this administration, but it doesn't mean you can't be in the bowels of an agency doing good work outside of the political view. And I also think you can make a difference in the business sector. So there's still a lot of opportunities you have to try to build an environmental ethic and make environmental progress.
Yeah, one of my biggest fears right now, having spent some time on this campus, is that people are understandably jaded. My goodness, I don't want to get in public service. It does feel like a swamp. And I think right now is exactly why you should be in public service. I've been inspired by the students on this campus, and I'm inspired by your intellectual curiosity, your optimism, your passion. I've been up here with Michael Steele, former RNC chairman. We disagree on a lot of things, but we have a lot of shared values, and we look for common ground, and I see that search underway on this campus, and you have to do it. The millennial generation may be less attached to institutions like the party than I am, but you're the most altruistic generation around. You wear your values on your sleeve. You care about climate. You care about you care about women's reproductive health rights. You care about dreamers. You care about each other. I mean, you understand the golden rule. You're not about just yourself. We all succeed only when we all succeed. That's your ethos, and you need to bring that ethos to public service. The rewards are priceless. I may not be the richest guy in the world, and nor is Gina, but for us, throughout a career of public service, and we have both served under Republican and Democratic administrations, the non-monetary rewards have been priceless, and we wouldn't trade it for anything in the world. And so my bottom line is get it there.
It's perfectly
Gina McCarthy, Tom Perez, I want to thank you for your federal service, your state service, for educating us. Thank you all.